Yeah, we're just waiting on a couple of the presenters, actually, not us. So let's wait a couple more minutes. MML and Mako are en route, so let's hold on. Oh, come on up. Okay, yeah, there we are. Okay, I apologize, I didn't see you back there. Okay, well, let's get started then. We've got a panel of four, and we're going to bring, well, Claudia Wilson-Randall from the Community Development Network of Maryland. We've got Lisa May from the Maryland Realtors, hopefully somewhere. Okay, come on up. And then we've got Dominique Butchko from Mako and Angelica Bailey Thupari from MML. So why don't we got 4 seats. We got 4 witnesses. And Ms. Randall, we're going to let you do lead off, and we'll just go down the row. And why don't we hold off questions until we kind of get maybe through all 4, and then we'll open up to questions from the panel, okay? Okay, Ms. Randall, why don't you lead off?
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claudia Wilson-Randall. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Development Network of Maryland. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you, Chair Feldman, for the invitation, for the briefing on affordable housing statewide and local partnerships. Wow, this is a very big and important topic for our state, and I am honored to be here talking about affordable housing today. The Community Development Network, we are a statewide network of housing and community development professionals, including community development corporations, nonprofits, as well as for-profits developing affordable housing in Maryland's urban, suburban, and rural communities. CDN envisions a state in which all neighborhoods and communities have opportunities for themselves and their families to thrive. What I first want to do is kind of kick off this panel by setting the context for what of this statewide issue and the challenges that we face in the next coming years. Affordable housing is generally defined as housing in which the occupant is paying no more than 30% of gross income for housing costs, including utilities. We have studied this problem sufficiently. We don't need any more committees or panels to decide, or more data about where the problem is and how much it is. We've studied it sufficiently. The problem is complex, and it's a very expensive issue. As we move forward on this issue, we will have to take a strategy that is really housing and. So it's about housing and health, housing and education, housing and economic development, housing and workforce development, housing and transportation, and all the way down the line to many other issues that intersect with housing. This first slide that I'm showing is from the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. It is what they call the Out of Reach report from 2022. So it was released, I believe, in August of 2022. And it shows that Maryland is the 9th least affordable state in the country. In Maryland, the fair market rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is roughly $1,500. And in order to afford this rent, a household needs to make $60,183 annually, assuming a 48-hour work week. And we have areas of the state that are even more unaffordable. In Washington, the housing wage is $34.22. In the Baltimore statistical area, it is $26.83. In Southern Maryland, it is $26.38. In Cecil County, it is $24.96. So this is a significant challenge for our state. If you have a minimum wage job, you would need to make to work 93 hours per week in order to afford a two-bedroom apartment. 78 hours if you wanted to afford a one-bedroom apartment. This is a significant economic challenge as there are still many jobs that are needed in our economy that pay less than $60,000, 183. And this table also, I linked to this in the materials that you were given to the full report. And so representatives, if you would like to go down and look at your jurisdiction, you can see exactly what the housing wage is for that jurisdiction if people are interested in doing that, and I encourage you to do so. So what does it mean to build a state with opportunity? And how are we building a state with opportunity? I want to put this squarely about people. I have a lot of data and a lot of information about affordable housing. The Community Development Network of Maryland is part of the National Low-Income Housing as well as many national advocacy organizations. But I don't want this to just be about data. I want us to really center people. I put these two slides up. One is a picture of a client who is facing eviction in Baltimore City, who is disabled. And so during the pandemic, she was not able to work, facing eviction. She is not able to work from home. And so significant barriers to her being able to hold on to her home. This is undoubtedly a racial justice issue. Discrimination, I always say, begins at home. And most of our discriminatory policies have begun with housing policy in the U.S. We need to put people first. We also need to invest in community infrastructure, so it's not only about the house being built, but it's also about utilities. It's also about digital connection, broadband connection, and other infrastructure that are connected to housing. Overall, what we really need to be thinking about is how do we build an equitable economy in the state of Maryland. This issue is also very much connected to the cycle of incarceration. We see that men have been caught in, black men in particular have been caught in a cycle of incarceration, but black women have been caught in a similar cycle of eviction in our state. So we need to think about this housing and affordable housing also as a connection to opportunity as we move forward. Just some background. In 2018, the Community Development Network pushed the state legislature to adopt a bill which would mandate the Department of Housing and Community Development for Maryland to do a housing assessment of the needs in Maryland. So in 2019, the Department of Housing and Community Development put out a request for proposals, and the National Center for Smart Growth and the Enterprise Community Partners were selected to do a full statewide needs assessment of the need for housing in Maryland. And in 2019, both the partners together began their work. They experienced significant delays because of COVID in their report, but a full report and a final report was put out in February of 2021. So what's in that report? So the report is more than 300 pages without an executive summary, but with considerable amount of data about where areas that are challenged on affordable housing and the significant need for affordable housing. The report also lays out a set of statewide priorities, and it shows that in 2021, it said that we were 85,000 units short of affordable housing statewide. That's significant. We've got a lot of work to do, and it's not going to be done in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's going to take considerable, consistent, intentional attention in order for us to get to 85,000 units, or probably what's more like 110,000 units post-pandemic. Also in the report is an assessment of the conditions, the identifications of the needs for each region. It contains a policy toolbox, as well as appendices and the supplementary data for particular populations and needs throughout the state. I also want to say that the next couple of slides are directly from the report from the National Center for Smart Growth. This is what, in 2021, when the report came out, they were looking at what the demand looks like statewide. And so right now we have about 2,400,000 in Maryland, and in 2030 we're looking at 2,500,000. Which is a growth of about 8%. We will see a significant rise in the number of seniors in Maryland. So we're in 2017, we were talking about 14% of the population. We're moving to closer to 20 to 18 to 19% of the population forecasted for 2030. We're also seeing a significant rise in the number of people with disabilities in our state. So this is a significant challenge as the population grows, as the number of seniors grow in our state. So I just want to take a couple of minutes and look at the statewide snapshot for Maryland. I thought it was important to talk a little bit about what is going on with the renters market, and then what's going on, what are some of the common threads across the state. So as far as housing instability among renters, we see just an incredibly tight market right now, and increasing rents and limited supply for low-income households contributes to housing instability overall. And as a result, 40% of renters in Maryland pay 30% or more of their income on housing costs. 72% of severely cost-burdened renters are extremely low income. So those households are even further squeezed. We see limited affordability, and there's a lot of data about this. Maryland lacks rental options especially for the lowest income citizens in our state. Stakeholders within the context of the Affordable Housing Needs Assessment also said that the discussion of area median income, which is a HUD language, as a measure of affordability, also masks the actual needs for affordability in communities with higher costs. So those of you from Montgomery County know that we often talk in this area median income language, and we're seeing a lot of pressure in that market in particular. We're also seeing high concentrations of subsidized units. So most of the subsidized units in the state of Maryland are in Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County. And there was a lot of discussion about the need for integrating subsidized housing throughout communities, both within a community and across the state. So we see concentrations of renters in low opportunity areas throughout the state. We also see in the coming years, actually, what will be expiring subsidies. So we see a lot of subsidies that will expire, and if we are also not paying attention to holding on to the affordable housing units that we have in the state, that will also further complicate this issue. Between 2017 and present, we see another rise in rent. We saw a significantly increase between 2000 and 2017, but throughout the pandemic, we've seen 30 to 40% increases in rent. So we're seeing higher rents throughout. And we're also seeing continuing resistance to affordable housing overall. So we see a lot of NIMBY attitudes throughout the state and anti-development policies throughout the state. But this issue is not about someone else. This is about us. This is about our mothers, our fathers, our aunts and uncles, our cousin, our brother who served in the military and now has returned. This is about sisters and brothers. This is about who served your coffee, who works in your office. This issue is not about someone outside of our communities. Next, I want to just move to the cross-cutting issues and the themes that were identified throughout the state in the Maryland Housing Needs Assessment, because these are issues that it's just a common thread throughout the state. One, as I was previously speaking about, is just linking housing to opportunity and the need for housing in areas with high-quality healthcare, schools, job centers, and public transportation. The second point is housing discrimination is alive and well. Residents living in Maryland still encounter barriers when trying to access income-restricted and unsubsidized housing. So we still have source of income discrimination. We have folks who now, even though a bill has been passed, we still see folks being turned away because of their having a voucher. We also have an increasingly racially and ethnically diverse population in Maryland, and so as the population become more racially and ethnically diverse, we see past trends holding true. More diverse population may require a higher level of cultural competency in housing activities and services. So just connecting people with housing, connecting people with jobs and housing, it will be increasingly important for us to have cultural competency around that. We also know that growing child and youth population in the state of Maryland will also shape the need for housing over the next 10 years. 1 in 4 new households in Maryland will have at least one child under 18 years old. So this is really important in terms of types, who's allowed, where, access to school, access to opportunity. This will be a very important piece. And we also, as I said before, we also have a growing senior population, and it will also become critical because not only will we need housing for seniors, but we will also need housing for people who care for seniors. And that caregiver economy will be increasingly important. So that is the sort of the high level view of that. I also wanted to just say that affordable housing will continue to be an issue for the state of Maryland. And every minute we spend not addressing it will cost us money. So it's not going to go away. So I challenge all of you to keep your eye on this issue. It connects through so many issues that this committee will address in the coming session. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, originally I said we'd hold off questions till the end, but I actually think because of, we've got 4 different folks, 4 different perspectives, it'd be appropriate to maybe after each speaker open up to some Q&A. So for Ms. Randall, any questions? The presentation, very thorough job. Thank you very much. Senator Watson.
Thank you. Just for my own purposes, the definition of affordable is no more than 30% of your gross income being spent on rent or mortgage payment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you had mentioned something.
That's the HUD definition. Yes.
Okay. And then you had mentioned something. I just want to make sure I'm clear. You mentioned, I think you used the term NIMBY attitudes. Never heard that before. What does that mean?
Not in my backyard.
Oh, with a Y.
Where have you been, man? That's pretty common knowledge. I mean, that's the term, you know.
In somebody else's backyard, obviously. Thank you very much.
Okay, any additional questions for, we've got Senator Washington.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to follow up on Senator Watson's. So you setting the standard for affordability at 30% is a HUD. Do states have flexibility similar to what we do when it comes to Medicaid or a benefit to have it be a higher proportion?
I don't see anyone going to a different definition. In very high-cost states, New York, for example, they still are using a 40%, right? But it's very targeted, and it's very clear when they're using that standard.
But, so the answer is yes.
Yes,
there is
in some cases,
some
but they're
flexibility.
rare, yes. Yes.
We're a rare state, but I know we just haven't done that, and so, and then my other question has to do with your opening statements, which I agree about intersectionality, interdisciplinary nature of housing, right? And some have, but how do you reckon that with our Housing First model, where the federal government and a lot of state agencies are prioritizing or scoring higher those programs that don't provide these additional supports or require those additional supports? This is a genuine question, because I agree with you that we have, over the years, over the last 8 years or so, very good programs that provide more wraparound, have received less funding because the prioritization has been focused on getting people into safe housing.
Wow. So I would just say it's complicated. I think that even with a Housing First model, that Housing First models that are prioritizing folks who they can connect not only with, recovery, with education, with job readiness, with, even some, sorts of social work service, education, care, clothing, any food, right, are going to be more successful. And we see, but I think that's a challenge. I think also, but thinking about, one of the things that I keep talking to folks about is I'm very excited about the passage of the blueprint, right? But that's not going to do it all for poor children. We're going to have to address the communities around those schools. We're going to have to address other things. It's going to have to be education right? In order for those children to really make significant gains. And so what I would say for a homeless population, right, it's not only that they need housing, they need other supports as well. So even if the housing came first, they're also going to need other sorts of supports with it. But I think your hesitancy about it's really hard to do this. Yeah, it is really hard to do this.
Oh, it isn't hard. It's been a federal limitation placed
Yes.
on, or some interpretation that if a program has anything else attached to it other than just housing, then it's scored lower.
Right.
Right, and so that.
Right,
that's-
because, but, yeah, I think
Yeah.
you understand also where their federal government is coming from, which is
Right.
saying hey, you got to get to folks in a position where they're stably housed before they can engage in any programmatic piece.
Yes,
It's hard.
okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
It's difficult, it's challenging.
Okay, we'll go to Senator Carrozza, Senator Brooks, and to Vice Chair Kagan. Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Ms. Randall, thanks for coming to my district. Princess Anne, we enjoyed having you. Two quick questions, and it's really will be a theme maybe for the other presenters. One, just looking at the existing programs, the Department of Housing and Community Development provided us with program investments, and there's several programs that hit whether it's rental housing, Maryland Affordable Housing Trust, Homeowner Assistance Fund. So my first question is, are we doing everything we can to maximize the current programs on the books? Because I actually found during COVID, I spent a lot of time matching constituent needs to the programs that are out there, number one. And number two, you mentioned affordable housing tied to the work, basically tied to opportunity. Opportunity, I believe, can be this workforce shortage. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts on how you can kind of link affordable housing, workforce shortage. One example in my district would be the fact we're very challenged with seasonal housing to address the shortage in the hospitality industry. So those are my two quick questions.
Wow. So I'm going to answer the first question first, and then I think some of the other presenters will get to your other question. The first question is, so workforce, we see the housing shortage show up in this workforce development challenge all the time, right? So bus drivers, like I keep telling everyone, this is an affordable housing problem, right? Where's a bus driver supposed to live in Montgomery County at a bus driver wage? Can't do it. It's not possible. And then there's the question of, even if it was possible, how would you get to that school on time, right? Without some reliable transportation, right? So you could see a subsidy working to say, hospitality workers, or particular industries saying, we're going to invest in some affordable housing and have a cap. And again, $60,000 is even high, right? But we could see even thinking about making a group of a subsidy available to people in particular industries in a particular area. You could see really targeting that. I think on the development side, we're going to have to also just think creatively about what the economic needs are, right? So if you are recruiting a company to come and locate in Princess Anne, my question is, where will workers from that industry work? And we're going to have to think creatively about that. We're going to have to ask the person who's actually locating the jobs there. It's like, okay, so what are you going to put in for housing? What additional dollars can you do to help us build the housing or subsidize housing for the workers that you need to run your business? We're going to have to think about using our bond capacity to, for down payment assistance for folks. We're going to have to just think creatively about this. And I just keep emphasizing the need for us to be thinking about housing right? And if we want someone to figure out how they get well and live in their own house, we're going to have to figure out ways to actually invest in existing older adults' homes in order for them to be safe places for them to live and age in place.
But again, going back to this.
So do we have the
live
programs
well-
that we need?
So I'm looking at this, and I'm just always concerned that we have people out there with the needs and that don't even know what's currently available.
I
to
agree
them.
with that. Yes. So I would also say to your first question, no, we don't have everything that we need at the Department of Housing and Community Development. I think they have been doing an incredible amount of work during the pandemic. A lot of the money that came through ARPA went through that department, but there's certainly more to be done in terms of connecting. And I just can't emphasize, government is always good about this, but like the Department of Aging should know about all the programs that are available in the Department of Housing, but they don't, and they don't always talk to each other. And the Department of Health should know about all the, so we have a lot of siloed interests that would be helped by a housing approach, or right, no wrong door, where everybody comes in and you're actually not only treating that person, but really looking at the whole household. We also have intergenerational households, which I don't think the market addresses at all. Older people don't necessarily live alone. They often live in the context of a family. So we also have school-age children, and we could be doing more to cross-cut those interests. But there's a lot there at the Department of Housing and Community Development, and I think more could be done to also amplify the programs that do exist and to fund them at a greater level, right? Weatherization is a good example. It has benefited from additional funds from the homeowners assistance funds from Treasury during the pandemic, but I think even more could be done.
Thank you.
Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation, Ms. Randall. I'm Senator Brooks. Quick question. You said that the HUD definition was that 30% of your gross. And one of the arguments we used to have in my profession that when you look at gross, then you deduct everything's based on gross.
Yeah.
Federal income taxes.
Yeah.
Your state income taxes.
Yeah.
Social Security, Medicare, and that gross doesn't seem to last as a substantial number anymore, you know. I wonder, I just did some quick calculations on a person making minimum wage, and I think on January 1, it went up to $13.25 an hour. Times 80 hours, you're talking about $27,560. And you divide that by 12 months, you're talking about rent of $689. I don't know anywhere in Maryland where you can rent in a place for $689. So it seems like we're starting out in a very, very flawed position.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I'm just trying to say, how do we make any sense of this? And without, like I said, major subsidies, you can't.
We can't get there from here.
You can't
Yeah.
get there from here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
that's my position. Thanks.
Okay, Vice Chair Kagan, then we'll go over to the other side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Russ, thank you so much for being with us. Randall, sorry, I knew I was getting it wrong. That's what the glasses are for. Thank you for your informative testimony. I have a few things. First off, in response to Senator Watson's question, 30%, or I thought you said 30% for rent and utilities.
Yeah, so the HUD definition is rent and utilities.
And utilities.
That's correct.
Okay, so I just
That's
wanted to be
correct.
precise about
Yes.
that. Because sometimes when our utility bills are going through the roof, that makes it even more pressing.
Yes.
So, thank you. Second, so you got a lot of your information from the National Center for Smart Growth, which is, you know, was established by our former governor, Paris Glendenning, and Maryland was very early. I don't know if we were the first, but we were certainly very early, if we weren't the first, adopter of that. I wonder in your data whether you have any knowledge or information about how we're doing on smart growth, because we know that housing is impossible and impossibly expensive, but putting it in dense areas and on purpose, building it up there and creating more affordable housing units. And I should say that in my past, I worked on abortion rights, I worked on gun control, and by far the most controversial, ugliest issue I ever worked on was affordable housing. And the coded language and the hate that came back from the community was awful. And yes, NIMBYs, and we don't want those people living in our neighborhood, and it was just disgusting. So I wonder about any updates that you might have on smart growth. And then I have one more question. The discriminatory treatment, I'm wondering how effectively testers are being used now, and whether there is also any information about discrimination on linguistic diversity, in addition to ethnic and racial diversity. So I know I've just thrown a lot of things at you.
So, okay, I don't have any information about how we're doing on smart growth, but I certainly can inquire and get that information for you. The testing on discrimination, I don't have information. We can get that, but I know there has been testing being done, so we can find out.
Do you happen to know whether it's being done by DHCD at the state level, or the Office of Civil Rights, or anything like that, or is it county?
Good question. Okay, so I know that the Fair Housing Action Center of Maryland was doing some testing, and we can go deeper on that. I don't know that there's been state testing going on, but I'm not aware of any. That doesn't mean it's not being done.
I'm so interested. And linguistic diversity, I would think that that's part of a challenge, too. I don't
Yes.
know whether anyone looks at it.
I don't know.
Maybe we can follow up another time.
Okay,
Thank
will
you so
do.
much,
Yep.
Ms. Randall. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Lewis Young, you had your light earlier, do you want to weigh in, and then we'll go to Senator Gallion right after that?
Thank you, I did, and I will take a stab at this one. In Frederick County, our United Way gives us an annual ALICE presentation for anyone that isn't familiar with ALICE, it's asset limited, income constrained employed. 40% of Frederick County qualifies as ALICE households. It's a more holistic approach to affordability on all key services. It includes housing and daycare and healthcare, et cetera. How could potentially using that kind of data give us a better perspective of how the housing component plays a part of a family or individual's total affordability picture?
All of the data is really helpful and that approach has been really helpful. But you're going to need all hands on deck, all approaches to solve this problem. Like it's not one approach. And I think my panelists that will follow, it's not like we need to do one thing and that'll say, we need all the approaches on the table. And we need different approaches for the extremely low income. We need different approaches for seniors. There's going to have to be a number of approaches at the table in order to solve this problem.
Thank you.
Okay, Senator Gallion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Randall. A couple questions. I actually had heard of the NIMBY thing before, so I knew about that. But I'm just wondering how much of that is related to, so I represent Harvard and Cecil counties. How much of that is related to concerns over stuff like increased need, increased traffic congestion, more, money for schools in the area, emergency services? Because that's kind of in our area, that's what you hear mainly are concerns. Whenever you're trying to build more houses or any kind of housing, those are the first things we hear. And that, of course, that's more at the local government level. But is that a concern, like with the local zoning codes and stuff?
I'm going to defer that question to MACO and MML because I think they're in a better position to answer those questions about local concerns. But yes, I mean, the short answer is yes. But don't shy away from that because it's not going to get us there. Hey guys, we need more housing. 85,000 units. Yep, some people are going to be upset by more traffic. But in order for their mother to be taken care of, in order for services to be delivered, we're going to need those houses. And it's not for somewhere else. It's what's needed for Cecil and Hartford County. It's the services needed for them. It's not somewhere else. It's not outsiders, so to speak.
Right. My concern with the fire service background is, though, when you increase call volumes and they're already struggling, but we can, get to that a little later on. Second thing, a lot of stuff was correlated to the minimum wage. How many? I would think, to me, like I'm not automatically assuming if someone is in a certain need of housing that they're working a minimum wage job. Wouldn't a large percent of folks that are making minimum wage most likely are still in with their parents, they're in like an entry-level job? I mean, wouldn't it be better to kind of talk about like maybe a median income or average income instead of always going right to the minimum wage number?
Yeah, I don't want to lose too much time and not have time for the other presenters, but so the link to the full report goes to other professions that need affordable housing that is not based on minimum wage at all.
Okay, great, thank you.
So yes, that analysis has been done.
Okay, well, I have one kind of final question before we move to the next witness. So just other than tax credits, what other mechanisms would there be to incentivize the construction of affordable housing? Just kind of a threshold question. You're talking about what could be done policy-wise to incentivize more construction on that front?
I think we're going to get to some of the other, we're going to get to the other presenters.
Okay, I'll table that question.
Yeah.
I want you all to ponder
Okay.
that. Okay, well, Ms. Randall, I appreciate your testimony. Excellent presentation. We're going to next move to the Maryland Realtors, Lisa May, and the floor is yours.
I'm going to try to get here. Okay, I think this is you. Okay, this is you, right? Yeah, okay.
Got our crack whip staff's going to get everything in order here.
Sorry about that.
That's fine. You can use that one.
Bear with me, guys.
It's an overall awkward silence here.
Anyone, I was just going to say, does anyone have a good, clean joke, since we're live streaming? Will it kill time here?
Or a housing joke, that would be really.
That would be impressive. Yeah, there we go.
I'm fine. I'm just,
By the way, while we're, a couple of loose ends from last meeting, so stick around when we're done with the briefing. Just a couple of clarifying, couple of questions popped up at the end of the last meeting. I wanted to put a little more meat clarification on the bones. We had, again, a couple of questions popped up, so stick around for a couple of minutes.
If we're having
think I
difficulty,
might
then
have to log back into the Zoom to get up the sharing capabilities, so my
Yep.
apologies.
if we
For
need
the
to go
delay.
without it, we can. It's,
I'll
I
get
mean,
it up for you.
okay.
I just have to bring the Zoom back up. So,
Right there.
this one,
That
okay.
one.
Perfect.
Okay, looks like we're ready to roll.
Quite all right.
Good job,
The delay.
team effort. Okay, Ms. May, whenever you're ready to go, it's all yours.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Lisa May, I'm with the Maryland Realtors, and very much appreciate the opportunity to be here with you today. Maryland Realtors represents around 30,000 real estate professionals who live and work here in the state, and that includes realtors, affiliated service providers, and your smaller mom-and-pop rental housing providers and managers. Over the past few years, what we have heard from our members more than any other issue is housing supply, and specifically the lack of it. So today, I want to share some of the data that we have on Maryland's current housing supply and some prescriptions that we have that could begin to address our housing shortage. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware of the disparities that we have in home ownership rates nationwide, and some of them are at the widest levels that they have ever been. In Maryland, we are slightly outperforming the national rates, but you can see that we still have a lot of work to do. Maryland's tied for the 5th highest Black home ownership rate in the country. It is still the most affordable state in the country for Black home ownership, but we still have a 26-point disparity between our Black and white home ownership rates. Maryland also has the second highest level of college-educated Latinos in the top 5 states for Hispanic population growth, and we are tied for 14th for the highest level of Hispanic homeownership. Yet we still have almost a 20-point gap between Black and Hispanic homeownership rates. Maryland residents feel these disparities too. Our organization conducts an annual statewide housing survey, what we call our state of housing in Maryland. And most Marylanders believe that people of color face different challenges when looking for housing in our state. But those disparities are not just found on racial and ethnic terms, but also different age and socioeconomic groups are finding different challenges in finding housing as well. Our survey revealed that significant majorities of low-income workers, young professionals, seniors, and those living with disabilities are having a real challenge finding the housing that they need here in Maryland. But for the first time last year, we had a majority respond that there's too little housing for middle-income residents as well. And for those of you who have heard the term in a poll, everyone is middle class, when you ask a question like this, people are really saying there is not enough housing for people like me in Maryland. We are currently finalizing the 2023 study, but I can tell you from our top line results that number is going to jump significantly when we finalize that even more middle income people are not finding the housing that they need. So why is that? Why are we seeing these large numbers of groups experience a housing struggle? We're going to assert that in large part it comes down to supply. You can see our long-term trend line here for building permits issued in Maryland dating back to 1960, and it is a downward trend. Overall, we tend to drop our annual housing production by 10,000 units per year in each successive decade. You'll also see the drop-off that we had around 2008 following the housing crash. Since that time, we've had near record demand for housing, and yet our housing production has not gotten back to the 20,000 unit annual production that we had prior to the crash. So what should our housing production look like? Generally speaking, we like to have a balance in housing and produce 1 housing unit for every 2 jobs that we create in the state. Before the pandemic, we were creating it at a rate of 1 unit for every 3 jobs that we created. And then during the pandemic, that dropped to 1 unit for every 8 jobs that we created. Using data from Freddie Mac and the National Association of Realtors, we estimated that our pre-pandemic housing unit shortage was about 82,000 units. And those of you who were here in the General Assembly last year heard us use that number quite a bit. I'll just say every chance that we got. But you can see that there is an asterisk there. This is a pre-pandemic number. And while we were in the height of COVID, our projections fluctuated wildly because we had labor shortages, we had inventory shortages, supply chain issues, large employment swings, and we just could not really settle on a number that we had confidence in. But now that we're mostly past the disruptions of the pandemic, we do have some more confidence in our data, and we estimate that our housing shortage grew another 37,000 units during COVID and is now nearly 120,000 units that we are short statewide. So not only are we not closing the gap in our housing shortage, we're now growing it exponentially. There's another lingering impact from the pandemic, and that is inflation. It's certainly not helping affordability in many areas of our economy, and these were covered pretty widely in the news. For rents nationwide, that was a 22% increase as of the middle of 2022. In Maryland, we saw that as a 12% increase because we enacted more rent and eviction protections than some other states in the country. Gas prices, of course, we had a brief gas tax holiday. We talked about more, a lot of talk about gas prices. But we forgot to add one column to this, and that is where our housing inflation was. Between price increases and a doubling of mortgage interest rates last year, we saw what our Realtor economists showed as the double trouble for housing. The median home buyer lost $107,000 in purchase power from the beginning of 2022 to the end, and our affordability index fell by 29 points. We also currently have the lowest share of first-time home buyers that we've ever had since tracking that statistic. They used to be over half of all home purchases. They are now in the 27 to 29% range. But most importantly, from our standpoint, we haven't seen the same level of urgency to address this housing inflation number and this housing shortage as we have some of the other categories that we have on this list. So I believe that it was mentioned earlier, there is no silver bullet. We are going to need a wide variety of solutions because different populations need different types of housing. For seniors aging in place or downsizing, it is needed, but they prefer to stay in their communities, close to their friends, close to their families. Our Hispanic population tend to look more for single-family homes, either with separate living units or business space. And so as a result, they tend to shy away from condos and townhomes that are in homeowners associations that don't allow for that type of usage or the parking of their work vehicles. 11% of purchases overall sought multi-generational homes, and that jumps to 18 to 19% of buyers for Hispanic, Black, and Asian populations. But these are the homes that we're no longer building. Triplexes, duplexes, quadplexes, those used to be 7% of our housing stock. They are now 1.5% of our overall housing stock, and by and large, they are older and grandfathered in because our current zoning ordinances do not allow for them to be constructed. Our Black home buyers currently tend to find housing in segregated neighborhoods. If we are to expand homeownership opportunities for them, we need more diverse housing in more diverse areas and more diverse neighborhoods. But the bottom line is, if we want to change any of these trends, we really need just more housing. The status quo keeps the supply of homes limited, and it locks in the disparities that we currently see in our marketplace. And because so many of your questions were about possible solutions, I'm very happy that I decided to include these slides for you. But yes, most of our housing supply is controlled at the local level. There are still some things that we can do here in the General Assembly to address housing supply, however. So one of those is accessory dwelling units. Maryland Realtors supported legislation last session, and in fact, it came here to this committee. And it would create a floor for allowing accessory dwelling units, which are your basement apartments, your carriage houses, a backyard cottage, in any area that is zoned for residential use in a county, city, or municipality. Unlike other housing types, these units can be added quickly where there is existing infrastructure. They can be built cost-effectively and without needing government subsidies to do so. We would also like to see more action on adaptive reuse, which is where you use outdated and obsolete commercial spaces to convert for housing. In 2021, the General Assembly approved legislation to create a task force on adaptive reuse, but that group never completed their work before the legislative authority expired. There are states and there are cities that are really leading on this issue, that are looking to some of the barriers that exist for conversion of commercial spaces into residential, and we need to move forward to match them. Incentives, funding preferences, and the like can be used to encourage local governments or to encourage private developers to build the housing types that we are needed. We just saw some of this at the federal level, where priority for grant funding and for financing is given to those localities that are making good on the promise to add the housing types that we need. And we can also do more to quantify both our housing needs and housing production here in the state. Last year, we had House Bill 705 that was introduced in the House E&T that would require reporting on the number of housing units that are produced annually in Maryland. Much of our current housing research is done sort of in a silo, where we look at either the need for a particular housing type or a particular population that needs housing, or we look at housing from the metropolitan statistical level, a regional housing, but we don't do a whole lot at the statewide level to quantify our needs, to develop an action plan, and to set accountability for actually producing those housing units. And then on the programmatic side, the Maryland Mortgage Program is absolutely wonderful. It has fantastic loan products, and it outperforms other types of housing loans with our underserved populations. But we have heard that there is not more widespread adoption of the Maryland Mortgage Program among lenders because the compensation that is offered is not keeping up with the industry standard, and that some of our mortgage lenders have been discouraged from offering Maryland mortgage products because it is essentially more work for less money. So we could look at increasing that to make these more attractive for lenders to offer to Maryland residents. Another type of loan product that is in short supply are those that allow individuals to both purchase and do a substantial rehabilitation on a housing unit. Without those types of loan products, they're really off limits to an average buyer. They really fall more to your larger investors to tackle that, because our citizens off the street just do not have the capital reserves to do a major rehab and purchase the home. We have also established first-time homebuyer savings accounts. That was something that the General Assembly passed in 2021. Not many people know that they exist. And what we have heard from DHCD is that they lack the budgetary funds to really promote these the way that the legislation intended them to, among the public, among mortgage lenders, among tax preparers. These are a great way to save for your down payment and closing costs in a tax-advantaged way. Those of you who are familiar with Roth IRAs, they function somewhat the same way. We are just not taking advantage of them the way that we need to. And then finally, we do need targeted assistance for rising rents, particularly when it comes to property tax assessments. I'm sure many of you saw that the most recent assessments came out, and it was a 22% jump in the housing values that came through. But unlike owner-occupied properties, rental property owners do not have the benefit of our homestead tax credit. So the full freight of those property tax increases gets passed along in the form of higher rents for our residents. We could look, for instance, at either applying some sort of limited homestead or some sort of circuit breaker that helps to limit that for affordable rentals, or we could expand our current renters' property tax credit program to additional people to raise the limits for eligibility for that. For those of you who really like to read on housing issues, I have included these reports, which we rely on a lot in doing our housing analysis. I'll also mention that new State of Housing survey, which we are finalizing next month, will be available on our opendoorsmaryland.org website. And we will be happy to send those results to any of you as well. So with that, thank you so much for allowing us to be here today, and I welcome any of your questions.
Just before I open up to questions, just quickly, you identified, at least by my count, 4 bills that were introduced in the last 2 years. The ADUs bill, which was Senate Bill 871, HB 1259, adapted reuse of commercial property, Senate Bill 765. I'm sorry? Oh, that was your, okay. 20, and then comprehensive approaches to housing, House Bill 705, 2022. And then you mentioned the first-time home buyer savings account, which did pass 2021 but hasn't been utilized. Well, obviously, we have some institutional knowledge here, but maybe just these 4, for the benefit of those of us who weren't on the committee, could you maybe just send us sort of a little synopsis of the 4 and like where have the problems been, which bills passed, which, just so we have those 4 legislative potential vehicles kind of for all members of the committee, just a little summary of where things got derailed or where they passed, they haven't been working, that kind of thing. Okay, with that said, before we go to Senator Brooks, Senator Washington, since your name was just invoked as being the sponsor of one of these bills, maybe you want to just educate the committee a little bit about what happened to your bill.
So you will see them again.
Okay.
The bill around converting commercial property, the adaptive reuse, it passed. This body appointed members to serve on it, and other members weren't appointed. So it was not able to go ahead.
Who was responsible for appointing, was that up to the General Assembly?
Well, one side of the chamber appoints members, and so
Okay.
this side of the chamber appointed members, and then another side,
Okay.
there weren't concurrent
So the
members
House
appointed.
House dropped the ball. on appointing.
Well, and possibly there was a gubernatorial, but I'm just going to say that the
Okay.
committee never, so it wasn't the case that the committee came together and didn't form a
Gotcha.
report, it just was never able to come together. And then the other one, it just sort of got stuck towards the end, some politics and just some things, so I am looking forward to us looking at it again. It was put in sort of late and it was fast, and mostly because it's handled generally by local, so have to resolve that part of it.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
that's
you.
very
Thank you.
helpful. Senator Brooks.
Chair, and I want to thank Ms. May for highlighting my bill, HB 1178.
Oh,
Funny how I
you
did
got all the
that.
sponsors here. That's good.
As a first-time home buyer's credit, and primarily what that bill does is allows a first-time home buyer to put up to $5,000 into a first-time home buyer's account. It could be a state chartered bank, it could be a federally chartered bank, it could be a credit union, it could be an investment account, and you could do that for up to 10 years. Now, the maximum amount that can accumulate in that account plus growth is $50,000, and you have up to 15 years to pull those funds out and use them. Yeah. So and that account could be opened up for a child or grandchild. The caveat is this, that the only person who can take the subtraction modification would be the owner of the account. Yeah. But I think it's a great bill, and I think I can say that the Maryland Realtors Association used that as part of the CPE courses, I think in 2021. So yes, I always tell folks that's a good bill. I think Stevie Wonder could see that, so.
Yeah, well, I see Bill Costelli in the back. I believe I was a sponsor of that first-time home buyer years ago, but I couldn't get it done. So Senator Brooks, I appreciate you getting it over the finish line. And I remember Virginia for a long time had that savings account in place. So Okay, let's go to Senator Carrozza, and then anybody else has questions after that. Senator Carrozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief because you touched on the legislative part of the follow-up, but I also wanted to ask you if you would go and look at the programs of DHCD. You mentioned the Maryland Mortgage Program. I see there's the Maryland Affordable Housing Trust, the Homeowner Assistance Fund, just to get a sense of utilization, and, you kept coming back to just more housing. So wanted to, again, trying to see with the investments already made, if we can better, leverage and maximize them. And then the adaptive reuse of commercial properties, I mean, I understand we have a work group, but I guess I was going to try to, can we jumpstart it even more rather than a work group? Are there some ideas? I don't know if that all goes back to local zoning, but it seems to me that we have a lot of, I don't know, whether they're malls or, what we have, and is there something we could do that, rather than just study it, are there some ideas out there for it?
I think that there are models from other states. Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia at the city level are leaders on adaptive reuse. California, New York, I think by necessity, have also been leaders. I have not had a chance to review this piece of legislation because it just popped up today, but I understand that there actually is a bill that has been introduced on the House side on adaptive reuse. And right now, that is all that I know about it because I haven't had time to review it yet. But certainly, if we think that that is a step in the right direction, then we will be more than supportive of it.
Okay, Senator Washington, did you have anything to impart here on that last point?
Yes, we're trying to decide if it's a study or if it's because we do have to resolve some things, but I don't anticipate it'll just be a study, and we can definitely convert it if we make it a pilot or something. It's complicated. So we just felt that we should take some time to bring everybody together, and then next year come up with an actual plan with a funding source and all that. So.
Okay, we've got Senator Watson next.
Thanks. I have tons of questions, but I'll hold all of them and just ask one. How was the 120K shortfall calculated?
That is an excellent question. As I mentioned, it is difficult to come up with the exact right number. We have used data from Freddie Mac's research department and also our National Association of Realtors research department to come up with our best estimate of what the housing shortage is. It could be more, it could be less, but I think we all agree that our housing shortage is significant and it's growing.
I'm just trying to figure out how I could even quantify that in my home district. I mean, when you first said housing shortage, I first thought of homelessness, but no, we don't have people outside without a home. Is this unique to specific communities where folks are trying to migrate to or from? Because you mentioned it's statewide.
Yes.
And, me being the engineer I am, if we have a shortfall, then and we can substantiate it and quantify it, that drives a lot of other decision-making. But I'm kind of stuck right here of how do I know and where does that number come from? 120,000 shortfall of homes.
Yeah. So different research organizations have different estimates or different models. Freddie Mac has the nationwide shortage at 3.8 million units. Our National Association of Realtors has the national shortage at 5.5 million units. And that's without taking into issues of affordability. Our National Association, if you talk about affordable units, we're talking closer to 7 million that we are short at the national level. So we take that national shortage, we apply it to Maryland's population, to Maryland's land mass, to our employment figures, and we come up with a proxy of what Maryland's shortage is. Again, because we don't have that comprehensive look or study at here is what Maryland's shortage is within our borders. We have looked more at different aspects of the housing shortage, or we tend to look regionally. For instance, the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments has looked at the DC metro region, but of course that includes areas that are outside of Maryland as well.
And I thought you also mentioned the rise in housing prices.
Yes.
And so we talk about the rise in housing prices, but it was 2008 when the housing bubble burst, right? The rise in housing prices, are they back to what the prices were pre-2008? Or are they over and above?
They are over and above. And even with the rising interest rates that we saw last year, which did halt the double-digit increases that we saw throughout the pandemic, our housing prices were still up 6% year over year. Now, in some areas, they were flat. Some counties still experienced a 14 or 15% jump in housing prices. We do have those monthly housing statistics on our MarylandRealtors.org website, and we publish them as soon as they are available every month. I'd be happy to direct you to those so that you could at least see at a county level, here's what my district is experiencing.
And my last question is, how do you square rising housing prices with somebody like me who wants to see them rise in my community since I already have my own home, right? How do you square that? It seems like a community that's, especially if they've been around, want to see the prices of houses rise. Most folks, their form of investment in their future is their home. And so why is that such a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing when the cost of your housing appreciation outstrips individuals' wage growth, when it outstrips their ability to afford housing. And one day, current homeowners are going to want to sell their home for whatever reason, and you need to have a pool of buyers there to buy it who can afford it. Modest, sustainable housing appreciation is a good thing. You grow equity every month through your mortgage payment, and then that also helps with your personal net worth and your personal appreciation. But the wild swings in housing price appreciation that we've had over the past few years, they're not sustainable. And they are not good as a whole for all Maryland residents. We really need something that is much more predictable, much more steady, so that we can still have housing options for our workforce and for those who need them.
And lastly, is there a distinction between workforce housing and affordable housing?
There is. Workforce housing becomes typically is defined as between 80% of area median income and 120% of area median income. That is, again, is sort of like the affordable housing definition. It gets to some of the issues, but even those who are middle income and even above it can have issues finding housing if our supply is so constrained.
Okay, well, that's an excellent line of questioning. I think Sarah Watson sort of framed it. That's an excellent way of looking at it. I would say I'm on the board of directors of the Metro Washington Council of Government, COG, and we've had a lot of briefings on this topic. And I know it's a regional organization, but my recollection is that they had the ability to break it down. For example, Prince George's is part of the COG kind of footprint. I'd be interested, maybe we'll talk offline on that, because I'm a Maryland's rep, state legislative rep for the last 4 years on that board, and they do a good job, I think, gathering data on a lot of things, including this. So we'll table that. Okay, so we'll go back to Senator Washington. Sarah Watson, you're good. Your light's still on. We're good. Sarah Washington, you're up next.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you talk about the housing need or the lack of units, do we differentiate between, we focused a lot on new construction. Is there a separate analysis of the existing housing stock and the rate at which that is going on the market, or are there opportunities in that sector?
Yeah, we do keep track of the number of houses that, for instance, go on the for sale market every month. And typically, the months of housing supply is
Right.
the statistic that you would hear. Over the past few years, at least, and in some of our areas, it goes back more than 5 years, we have had essentially what is considered a seller's market, because the months of supply is not meeting the demand that exists in the marketplace. Typically, you want to see around a 6-month supply of housing for sale. We are currently, I believe the most recent stat I saw statewide, we're at 1.3 months. A year ago, we were barely at a month of housing supply, and we even had some counties who could measure their housing supply in days or weeks.
So is it that people are keeping the home, so because of the last 3 years, certainly, those that would have put their home on the market, maybe bought something bigger,
Yep.
are not doing that?
Yes, I think we
And so-
see a couple of lock-in effects.
Right.
Those who have housing right now can't find the other alternative on the market, so they stay put. Historically, we've heard that this is not as big of an impact as you might think, but if you consider that we have homeowners now who have mortgages at 3% or lower, the idea of purchasing a new home at 6% loses a little bit of its luster. That has not prevented people from buying and selling homes, even in the 80s when mortgage rates were, 17, 18%. Homes were still bought and sold then. But it can be a psychological kind of block because we have had such low interest rates for a very long time, 3s and 4%. When it's been at that level for such a long time, seeing 6 or 7% is quite jarring.
And I also appreciated your table on all the other costs. So certainly, you might not want more square footage if the electricity is going up, and then we have no management of that. And also, so in some jurisdictions, there is also a cap on the increase on the property taxes, because there's some, if your house is assessed more, for some, particularly if they have, their income is flat, they may be concerned about that. When you look at other states, or are those interventions that because it's kind of hard to tell people not to sell their house for as much as they can sell it. And so I'm really trying to think about, well, what could be our policy recommendation for the actual price of the home? So we can certainly subsidize and all that, but are there places where we are looking at energy, or looking at taxes, or looking at some other ways to reduce the overall cost of a home?
So there have been proposals, for instance, we do have, the homestead tax credit, which limits property tax increases. I believe we've had a couple of legislative proposals over the past few years that would allow a new buyer to essentially kind of carry over some of the seller's homestead tax credit and sort of phase in that increased assessment. Making sure that buyers know all of their options when it comes to down payment and closing cost grants that are available in localities, and those vary by locality. We have some robust down payment plans in places like Montgomery County, in Baltimore City, in Prince George's County. But if you look out to Western Maryland, or some of our communities on the Eastern Shore, they don't have the same types of assistance programs that exist in other parts of the state. So I do believe that there are some things that we could look at in that area that really help folks get their foot in the door to homeownership.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I think Good, we're done with the questions. Well, thank you very much
you.
for your testimony. Speaking of localities, we've got both MACO and MML here in the House. Do you have a preference as to which one? Did you have this orchestrated?
We're at the hip on this one.
Oh, you're okay. One presentation or two separate presentations?
One.
Just one, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Dominic, we've got you then to lead off. Dominic Butchko and from MACO, and your sidekick from
Sidekick.
MML.
This is,
Well, you said
This
you're
is a
attached at the hip.
yeah,
Maybe he's attached at mine.
Okay.
especially when it comes to your bad
Okay.
questions. This
Yes,
is a partnership.
touche. Okay, well, why don't you start, Dominic?
Yeah,
Get us
so,
going here.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dominic Butchko here with the Maryland Association of Counties. Thank you very much for having me, and Angelica Bailey with the Maryland Municipal League. Few things we want to go over before we start. Oh, wait, other way. There we go.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
So first and foremost, we just want to put out an important reminder here. So housing is an absolutely massive topic. Everyone else has mentioned how big it is. This is a very high-level overview. This is not everything comprehensive, and we just don't have enough time for this. But when you're hearing our presentation and considering what our co-panelists have said, please keep that in mind, because this is such a big issue. And so our first part, where do local governments come in on this? It was kind of touched on briefly in some of our other presenters, but local governments are really big players as far as the housing goes. So like no other jurisdiction within the state, nationally, local governments are going to be most impacted by housing policy, and we are going to feel those consequences the most. So first, my favorite type of government, a county. They're who pays my bills. So we have three major buckets where counties come in here. The first one is land use. And so we touched upon planning and zoning. And so there's a lot of major trade-offs. Counties have a really robust system for evaluating and implementing landing and zoning and planned use policy. And so you really have two major things you're trying to balance here. Do you want to balance preservation, so such as natural landscapes, agriculture, certain types of natural industries, or do you want to have more development? Do you want that development to look like low density? Do you want that development to look like high density? How much do you want that density to spread and where? And so counties are the major policy actor in that sphere. The next one is infrastructure. So right now, transportation and public services. So not only do we have to house people, but a big part of the housing problem is how are we going to get people from point A to point B? Because why do you have a house? How are you paying for it? Because you have a job, because you're a part of the economy. And so local governments are often operating that infrastructure. And then public services. So a big thing that you're going to hear in this presentation, when you build a house, you have to build more than just a house. You have to build the schools, you have to build the water and sanitation infrastructure. So there's a lot of public services that local governments have to stand up and operate, and we're the primary players in that area. And then the third bucket here is going to be delivering and implementing social programs and other types of programs. So first of all, incentives to encourage growth. And we have a fantastic slide on that. Counties are at the forefront when it comes to this, and we're really doing a lot in this. But also housing assistance and eviction prevention. And at the end of this presentation, the last two slides, when I touch on those, the one thing you take away, I want you to take away what we talk about on those slides. And then also social programs and homelessness. Because a big problem of housing is, what do you do when you don't have a house? And really, the only level of government, not the only level of government, but the main level of government that's playing in that pool right now is counties. And if we don't solve the housing crisis, it's going to become a social crisis, and counties are going to be the ones who are going to be really left to solve it. And so I'm going to transition now to Angelica.
Thank you. Angelica Bailey Thupari, Legislative Director for the Maryland Municipal League. So everything, well, almost everything that Dom just said is the same for municipalities. The difference I would highlight, most of our members do not have the resources to have their own distinct housing departments. So we can't offer the direct social programs that Dom and my fellow panelists have highlighted today, like rental assistance and eviction prevention. Our residents end up benefiting mostly from county, state, and federal financial programs. But we do maintain authority over planning and zoning, which is crucially important at the local level. And municipalities also often act as a middleman or a facilitator in the development aspect. So we might have the land, it might be available, we might have the zoning that's prepared for whatever that land needs to be utilized for, but we don't have the money to do it ourselves, so we need developers. We're not developers, but the developers often don't want raw land. They want it to already be developed somewhat, they want the infrastructure there, and we end up not having the resources to put that infrastructure in. So that's the way in which we're often a facilitator or a middleman in this dynamic.
All right, so when we think of housing policy, there are three main objectives that we want to do. First, we want to keep people in their homes. We want to prevent homelessness because once they transition into homelessness, the problem just escalates from there. The second main thing we want to do is we want to encourage development of new affordable housing stock. You know, as our economy grows, we're going to want to have new people and we want to be able to house them. And then the third major bucket is we want to preserve existing affordable housing stock. And so when we think of housing policy, if we can hit on all three of these, that is phenomenal, but we at least want to hit on one. And so local government successes. And so our local governments have been at the forefront of housing and have been doing a ton of stuff. And so I want to highlight four of our major things here. Our first one is Prince George's County and their right of first refusal program. This is a completely innovative program done at the local level, and they have seen, I think, 1,200 units preserved within the past 18 months. And so what happens is you want to sell, let's say you want to sell an apartment building or some type of building with multiple units. You have to tell the county that you have an offer. The county can partner with a nonprofit and potentially come in and buy that building, and then the nonprofit will, with certain financial instruments from the county and private actors, will come in and preserve affordable housing. And so this has been super successful in Prince George's, and hitting that third bucket we talked about, preserving affordable housing. Queen Anne's County, because this is a rural, urban, and suburban, this is statewide. So even our rural jurisdictions are really, this is important too, has a really innovative program with moderately priced dwelling units, MPDUs. And so let's say a local government has a certain threshold that you have to have affordable housing in your new construction. If you can't meet that threshold, you have to pay, you know, a significant financial cost then to the counties, a fee of some sorts, and then that goes into funding county affordable housing programs. So rental assistance, developing infrastructure, anything, that goes into a fund there. Baltimore County. I think Baltimore County in particular, 2023 will be known as the year of housing for them. Just last week, they put out a ton of historic programs, and I can tell you from what I'm hearing from Baltimore County, that's just the beginning. They're going to be rolling out even more historic programs on this. So housing opportunity funds processed for defining and addressing vacant blighted structures, and more social programs. And then Anne Arundel County in particular, because I know you guys care about data, has seen some of the biggest numbers here in production and preservation of affordable housing. So just to put it into context, 2015 to 2020, 362 units were either built or preserved. 2020 to 2025, you're going to see that number explode exponentially. 201 were already constructed, and 1,371 are in the pipeline. So a lot of stuff being done here at the local government level to preserve, expand affordable housing, and tackle this crisis.
One municipal program that I'd like to highlight as well is called the Here From Home Initiative from the City of Salisbury. No surprise that Mayor Jake Day from the City of Salisbury was just named the new Secretary of Housing, because this was a brilliant idea. They waived some city-mandated development fees and taxes for residential development if the developers agreed to pay a small flat fee focused on subsidized housing and agreed to meet certain timeframe requirements. It also included funding for homelessness programs that were pre-existing, and it created almost 9,000 new units in a very short period of time. That's both multifamily and single family. So it increased the housing supply, more attainable prices. The city had to take a bit of a financial hit, which is often the problem that we see at the municipal level, but that was able to be mitigated with a minimum payment in lieu of taxes.
And so one more, if you guys haven't figured it out, 3 is the common theme of the day. So major challenges, and this is really important for setting the scope here and framing the issue. So Major challenges, there's 3 buckets. So you have your first bucket, your fixable challenges that you as a body can help and try to fix today. You have your major trade-offs where there are certain policy solutions, and we talked about some of them with our other panelists, where there are going to be implications one way or another. Can it help housing? Yes, but you have to balance that with other things. And then you have certain realities that we have to deal with that there might not be a solution to, there might not be a solution to at the state level. So the first one on the fixable side, so more tools for local governments. If you go to our previous slide, we just told you all the wonderful and amazing things we're doing with housing. So a biggest one is going to be revising the land bank statute for Maryland. So I believe this was passed in 2017. Since that legislation was passed, not one local government has opted to create a land bank. That legislation, as currently implemented, that statute, is way too restrictive. There are tons of things with that bill alone that we can do to get counties more involved in this. More incentives for infrastructure and development and the creation of affordable housing. This stuff is expensive. Counties are right now footing a large portion of the bill. And so there's a lot of stuff we can do both financially and just with enabling legislation, and then direct assistance. So rental assistance, and we will be touching on that a little bit more. Home repairs, keeping people in their homes. Again, we want to prevent homelessness. And then transitional housing, we want to get people who are maybe transitioning out of prison or another situation into housing and then back into the general community. Also, and I mentioned this already, infrastructure. So late in 2022, MACO sent out a letter to the Governor-elect Moore about infrastructure and the surplus going on. And like I said previously, when you build a house, you're not only building housing, you're building water infrastructures, you're building schools, you're building transportation, you're building everything. Infrastructure is one of the main things keeping housing from going on. I'm going to give you a perfect example. Queen Anne's County right now, their water sanitation, their stormwater, they are at their limit. Under state legislation, under the state is saying Queen Anne's County cannot build any more housing because they're at their limit. The only way to solve this is with infrastructure investment, so their wastewater and their sanitation and everything else, so we can increase their capacity there. And Queen Anne's County isn't the only county having similar issues with infrastructure, and that's just one thing. And so, do you want to
Not the
comment
only
on that?
local government having issues with infrastructure, because that's very much the crux of the problem for municipalities, all of our towns and cities as well. New construction almost has to be subsidized for us, for towns to be able to purchase land, to finish the infrastructure build out that developers request, then to sell to the developer possibly at a lower rate than what they may have invested into the land. We really need some financial support in order to do that. And the other thing that municipalities, local governments in general need is flexibility. State laws that mandate local behavior, even well-intentioned ones, even ones that we might support in theory, often don't work for us. From the municipal perspective, there are 157 towns and cities in the state of Maryland. That represents between 1.5 and 2 million Maryland residents as of the last census. That's a lot of folks. They are diverse in every possible way. A one-size-fits-all mandate really just doesn't work for them. And we are the ones who are on the ground, who know our communities, who know what our communities need and want, what's best for them for growth. Everybody wants growth. It's good for the economy. It's good for building the community. But like Dom was highlighting the needs of infrastructure, we also know what's going on with our wastewater. We also know what's going on with coastal flooding and with the roads. And MML doesn't do anything with education, thank goodness, but also with the schools. Adequate public facilities is a major concern. We're the ones on the ground who are familiar with the issues, and that is why local zoning authority is so very crucially important to our folks.
And so to continue on from there, major trade-offs, because I think the biggest thing when you ask MACO and MML to come up, our biggest thing is credibility, because we are your partners in government. And so there's a few areas I want to touch on that we are going to have trade-offs on. So Senator Gallion and Senator Watson, you guys brought up 2 things in particular that are going to have major trade-offs. So, the rise of, do you want your house to rise or do you want it to be affordable? And so that is a policy question that what we do potentially has a major trade-off. Senator Gallion, you were talking about, we would term it as APF or APFO, adequate public facilities. And so that is primarily local legislation that says you can't build any more housing if you don't have the school infrastructure, the wastewater infrastructure, the transit infrastructure in place. And so a major trade-off could be we could get rid of those APFO requirements. But what are you going to do when you can't flush your toilet, or what you're flushing into the Chesapeake Bay is so polluted, or your kids are going to get a less quality education because our schools are overcrowded? And so we could get rid of that. Building codes and state fire regulations. So there is legislation, or there is statute where homes have to have certain fire suppression requirements. That adds tens of thousands of dollars. I've heard upward of $50,000 to the cost of building a home. We could get rid of that, but we will make people unsafe. Same thing for building energy performance standards. And Angelica, you have a few?
That was more than what I was thinking. Yeah, that's
So,
very much covers it.
And like we said, this isn't comprehensive, but there are plenty of things that we could make a decision to prioritize housing. But if we are going to do that, because we have to be honest, we're going to deprioritize safety, education, other things as well. And then there are certain realities that we have to live with if we are going to, play in the housing policy space. But there aren't easy solutions to. So broader economic forces, supply chain, labor markets, your local real estate market, you can have the best policies ever, but if you don't have the economy in your region to support growth, you're not going to get growth. Cost of materials, interest rates, and then environmental factors. So Maryland has I think it's the third largest amount of coastline in the United States. Where we decide to put housing and those environmental factors play a big role in that. And, I wish we could legislate away climate change, but we can't. It is something we have to deal with. In closing, though, I want to highlight for you guys one major thing. There is an impending crisis that will happen within the next few months if we do not act. During COVID, the federal government put out a massive amount of rental assistance. By roughly March, nearly all counties will have exhausted their emergency rental assistance funds. Renters are already behind on a lot of their rents if they're receiving funding from this program. And when this program ends, and a lot of counties have stopped accepting applications, so it is coming to an end, they will lose their last backstop. This will turn from a housing crisis into a social crisis. And like I said before, counties are the main player in delivering social programs. And when it turns into a social crisis, counties will be the primary actors there left to kind of handle this and clean it up. During COVID, there was talk of a potential mass eviction wave. That was prevented largely because of county infrastructure and federal and state funding. Without a continuation of this program, that mass eviction wave very possibly could start happening in March. I've heard June, but it is on the horizon. And I want to give you guys some data here to back this up. And this came from Scott Gobert. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but he is the vice president of the United Way of Central Maryland. They're an organization that's been very involved in housing. So what does this look like when I say a mass eviction wave? Approximately 34,000 households will likely face eviction next year. 17,000 of those, so roughly half, are preventable. 1 in 10 evictions will result in entry to a shelter, so that's 1,700 households, or little less than 4,500 individuals will become homeless. And this will almost completely reverse all progress that has been made in reducing homelessness over the past decade if we do not act on this problem alone. And you guys, you need fixable solutions. You're a deliberative body. This is a problem with a fixable solution. We need a Maryland-level state emergency rental assistance program. That is the only way we're going to prevent this. And so with that, I'm going to close. And, other way. Thank you very much.
Cheerful.
Okay, well, that was excellent. It was in passing, but for those of you who've been busy today, so there was a reference to Jake Day. So he was named today to be by Governor-elect Moore to be the next Secretary of Housing. So that many of us know him, and I think that's a significant appointment. One little correction I would say, because you gave Queen Anne's a lot of credit on the MPDUs. I do believe Montgomery County was the first out of the box historically on that front. Yeah, well, in the nation, first in the nation.
Mako loves MoCo.
But one question, Angelica, real quick, because you mentioned, the municipalities, and we have several folks here with a lot of municipalities have more difficulty accessing funds compared to the counties. Just to drill a little bit on that, how does that impact your ability to access federal money? because there's a federal component, so if you don't have your own housing departments, I mean, just sort of so I have an understanding of how the feds work in, where the money flow from the feds, for the municipalities in particular, could just sort of shed a little bit of light on that, given
Yeah.
your unique
Absolutely.
challenges?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the myriad complex federal housing programs that are out there, but you are exactly right. If you have a housing department, then a lot of those funds are channeled through that department. But there are other resources as well on the federal level. There are some programs that you can have access to. Some of them are special, such as ARPA, that kind of fund that's specially created for a limited period of time. Those pools are not large. Obviously, they're very competitive. The primary source of revenue for municipalities does come from property taxes rather than federal funding for these kinds of programs.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Senator Washington.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and just a comment on that last statement. I was wondering, that was a question, I said, well, are revenues declining for locals, for counties? Well, they are declining for locals and counties, locals and municipalities because of the drop in this number of houses that are sold. Is there a number that should, I guess I should ask the question, has there been an impact to local governments' revenues as a result of the changes in the housing market, the fact that we're not selling as many?
Sure, inflation is certainly harming local revenues. If we were able to build more homes, to attract more residents, to continue building our base, then that would be fantastic. But not only do we not have the money to be building new homes, as it's been touched on earlier, the housing stock is not turning over like it used to. So we might have lots of folks who are looking to buy houses, and they simply either can't afford to or the availability isn't there. So those are definitely challenges to attracting more residents that would help build our property tax space. I don't know that we've seen a drastic drop in revenues that's a direct correlation to that yet. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see that in the next few years, especially as inflation continues to rise.
Yeah, I'd be interested if you could share and track it and see if there has been
Absolutely.
any decline. My other question has to, and I also appreciate very much the privileging of local zoning. And however, also as a state, we have a housing issue. We have a crisis around affordable housing. So the issue of ADUs, so for folks, that those are accessory dwelling units. So that would be the ability to make a cottage house or an addition, an addition on the same lot, a separate unit. Right now, they call them in-law suites, et cetera, because most jurisdictions allow you to have a family member in one of those units. However, there's no universal allow for a property owner to rent that space or to provide that as housing. So could you, because we're going to see that bill as well, could you just talk a little bit about what role you see that accessory dwelling units could play in addressing the housing shortage?
Oh, you want to?
So just the shortage, so forget the affordability, so the shortage, but also the affordability in providing access to kind of smaller units at a smaller cost.
Yeah, so I think both of us are eager for this one, so I'll give the county perspective. So ADUs, a couple of things there. I think that they are an important part of the housing landscape. Counties certainly recognize they're an important part of the housing landscape. I think that they are built up to be more of a silver bullet than they actually are. You have almost all jurisdictions, if not every jurisdiction, allowing some form of an ADU, Montgomery County being one of the most progressive, but not the only. And you have, just like with planning and zoning policy in general, counties are looking at ADUs holistically, what works for their community, and are really already allowing a lot of them. Again, to pick on Montgomery again, they have a really innovative ADU policy that people just are opting not to use. I think it's a tool. I think it's a great tool. I don't think it's the only tool, and we should put more work into other stuff as well. Do you want to?
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I'm very familiar with ADUs. My mom is hoping that we build one in our backyard. She's also listening. Hi, Paula. I'm not kidding. I want to highlight two supply chain issues, right? The last few years, if you don't already have a she shed or an over-the-garage apartment or whatever you're going to use to build an ADU, it's been really expensive and really difficult to get the supplies, to get the contractors. My kitchen is so ugly. I would love to get it redone. We can't find a contractor. Every quote that we get is far and above what it should be. That's just the state of the residential development industry right now. But also, going back to local authority, local zoning, ADUs can be a fantastic tool. They can be. They are not the only tool, and they don't work in every community for a variety of reasons, one of the biggest being infrastructure.
Yeah, and if I can follow up, I was just going to say infrastructure, because if you read our testimony from the bill that was brought up last year, and it is the truth, infrastructure is the main thing with ADUs that's going to be a problem, because if you have a community designed a certain way, if you have water filtration, et cetera, we need that infrastructure. Whether you're building an apartment or whether you're building an ADU, we have to have that capacity.
If you follow up, so if we address so if we have a program and we address the infrastructure issues, there won't be a problem?
I wouldn't say there wouldn't be a problem, because again, I think it's one tool in every jurisdiction. Some things are going to be more appropriate than others.
Right.
I think it would lessen the problem.
Right.
But there could be other things.
Good, we like that.
Yeah.
And so and no one's saying one, I mean, we've heard lots of solutions, so simply testifying that it's not a silver bullet is something that we're already quite aware of. The nice thing is that if you build a house on your property for your mom, you're probably fine. The issue is also if if there's an existing property, I'm frankly not allowed to do what I want to do with with a house I own, with land I own, to rent to whom I want to because of a zoning restriction. So say it's already there. If there's already an ability or a requirement that there be proper, sewer, you can't do X, Y, and Z, why shouldn't every Marylander have the right to rent, to be able to use that extra space?
Somewhat of a philosophical question, I think, but one of the answers is what do we owe to each other as a community, as residences, as neighbors? We're all pooling from the same resources.
Right.
You might have the right to build whatever you want on your property, but how is that going to affect your neighbors and the rest of your community if you're getting all of the...
we put all the requirements, we're not going to drain the system, you cap it at a certain number, et cetera, but particularly if you're dealing with the existing, not building anything more, but I have a shed, calling it a she shed or whatever, but a shed or a garage, or, there's something that's already existing.
Why can't you put somebody in it?
Yeah.
Depends on zoning, right? And the
Right.
zoning
Yes.
decisions are made after a lot of work and a lot of contemplation, a lot of stakeholder participation. They hire consultants. Councils spend months, if not years, on these long-term plans, on smart growth, on what's best for not just the infrastructure, but for the climate, some of the trade-offs that Dom was referring to earlier. It would be wonderful to just wave a wand and give everybody the money that they need in order to fix some of that, but that's not the only part of it. Infrastructure is major, but it's not the only aspect.
Well, I look forward to us working that out.
Very much.
As you both
Same,
are
yeah.
members in the legislation proposed to look at it. But I hope to some others' points that there could already are areas that want to move forward with those. So if there are jurisdictions that do want to move forward, perhaps you could work with us to incentivizing and supporting those jurisdictions, right? And perhaps having a state package that helps those areas. Would that be
Yeah, we'd be
something?
certainly open to having
A
that conversation.
jurisdiction per jurisdiction option, that is amazing.
That
We
is
love
not what I
enabling.
said. Thank you. Nice try.
Actually, Senator, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure, go on.
And this relates to a point you made earlier about property taxes. As we're talking about trade-offs and incentives, property taxes often comes up as one. I just want to highlight the city of Salisbury's example is unusual. Property taxes are fantastic for encouraging home purchases, but the folks who take the hit on that do end up being local governments. So they sound great, but they're often challenging for our bottom line.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Brooks, then Senator Lewis Young, Senator Watson, and then we've got the vice chair playing cleanup. Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Don, you had mentioned that the housing policy objective, one, to keep people in their homes, which is, I think that's what the landlords want to do as well, yeah. And number two, encourage the development of new affordable housing. Three, you said to preserve existing affordable housing stock. Now, and I thought you had also said that if we don't keep subsidizing, that we're going to lose, there's going to be like 32,000 people out on the street. Yeah. So how do you square that with being affordable if they're being subsidized? Then once those funds run out, yeah, then.
Yeah, so I think that there's, again, housing's very complicated, and so it's very broad. So I think you have, for as far as the emergency rental assistance goes, you have a certain subgroup of the population that are incredibly vulnerable, that right now aren't getting as many social programs and will potentially need a ton of assistance. How that fits in with like the need for housing, housing affordability broadly, am I understanding that correctly? I view them somewhat as separate issues. We need to help this community, this certain population, yes. And we also need to develop more affordable housing stock broadly, but they're kind of, housing policy is so broad, they're kind of two separate things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Okay. Secondly, with investors out there trying to buy up existing inventory, you know, and I guess they know that the rental prices keep increasing, so they want to suck all that inventory out of the market so they can control that. What kind of impact do you think that's having on the existing market?
So in Maryland, I can't speak to that particular impact because it varies from jurisdictions. And when we polled our members, we got a number of responses. What I can say is the Prince George's example, counties are doing things to prevent this. So the right of first refusal. So you say you want to sell your building, you have to inform the county. It's a very short window. I want to say it's like 5 business days or a week. I could be wrong there, but roughly that. And the county has to respond. And so they bring in a nonprofit. Counties has certain financial programs to help that nonprofit, and they agree to keep those units affordable. I think that if we can have more programs like that and more policy levers at the local government, we can prevent a lot of these private equity actors coming in and doing exactly what you just said.
So I can't sell to the highest bidder?
You could sell to, so what happens is you go to sell your home or your building and you get an offer.
Right.
So whatever that offer is, you take that to the county. So they're going to pay you $1 million, $10 million. You take that number to the county, and then the county has the right of first refusal. They could tell you no, but if they can come up with whatever the market is willing to pay you, then you'd have to sell to them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Yes, Senator
Thank you,
Lewis Young.
Mr. Chair. One of the greatest responsibilities of local government is determining how and where we grow. And as a former municipal elected official, I've always believed that it's critical that infrastructure be put in place concurrent with growth. What do you think the responsibilities are of local government to be responsible for the financial obligations of the critical infrastructure? We've talked about some of them today: education, transportation, water and sewer, street sanitation. What do you see as the role of local government?
Soundtrack to Hamilton and the Federalist Papers are coming to mind. I think that's a fantastic question. I think there's absolutely a heavy responsibility that our members take very, very seriously in providing public services, public goods, infrastructure to their residents. If there is a way to lessen the burden on local governments and increase affordable, attainable, mixed income housing that makes sense for the community, makes sense for the environment, fantastic. You know, we're not, on principle, we have to shoulder it all. We're willing to have partnerships and coalitions in that.
Okay, Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate the general discussion, and I have to always distill it down to the district I know. That's the 23rd District, which is Bowie and Upper Marlboro. And you had mentioned that, you know, everybody wants growth. No, everybody doesn't want growth. Not in Bowie, all right? There's a group of folks who want to retain as much open space as possible. And I can't believe that my area is the only area that has these sentiments. It has to be shared in other places. And so my first question is, how do you balance the need or desire for homes with folks who have been in the community, and I'm not exaggerating, for over 50 years in the same home? A place where, you know, there used to be a racetrack, everything was open and rural, and they very vocal community who want to keep it that way. You know, how do you negate that?
That sounds like NIMBYism to me, sir. That's one of those trade-offs and one of those almost unsolvable problems. Not everyone is going to be happy, as Claudia mentioned earlier. We have to weigh our priorities, weigh the needs and the best interests of our residents, and make the best decisions we can with the information and the resources we have available. These are not easy decisions by any stretch.
Right.
Everybody's doing their best, I think.
Yeah, and you can also drive, so Prince George's, for example, they are a major urban county, DC area. They have a major agricultural preserve. And so in every jurisdiction, because every jurisdiction is different, you can attempt to find a balance between Prince George's, we're going to drive development in the major transportation corridors along the metro line, and then we're going to make a conscious effort to preserve others. And so when, in your question in particular, that's really a local government jurisdiction by jurisdiction, in some areas community and community decision, and it's going to be different. And so it's going to be up to the people, and that's why we have, in counties in particular, a transparent process for planning and zoning, where the public can come up and say, this is what we want, this is what we don't want, and why we're constantly, planning and zoning policy is not monolith, it's not set in stone, it's constantly evolving. I think roughly every 5 years, we have to go redo our comp plans, and it's just something we have to constantly weigh.
Right, and since you brought up zoning, you know, we just completed a 50-year zoning rewrite in Prince George's County, which some pieces are still being critically looked at by our current council members. My last question is this. You know, in my district, there's a lack of amenities. And folks say, give me the amenities. And when I look at, you know, the big box stores, the nice high-end restaurants, there's two things that come up: density and median income. And for them to come to a certain locale, you have to have both. Inside of the Beltway, we have a lot of density, but not the median income. So you don't see your high-end stores there. Out in my district, you have the median income, but you don't see the density. So you don't have the high-end stores there. The concern that I'm thinking of is when you're bringing in the subsidized housing, that adds more density, but it kind of dilutes the median income. And again, I don't know what other areas of the state are experiencing this, but I've been laser focused on this because this is our desire to bring in amenities. And so how do you square, you know, adding additional housing, reducing the minimum median income, which is at a level less than the current folks in the surrounding area, to help me achieve my mission of bringing amenities to the area?
Well, and amenities are one of the examples of growth that I think a lot of communities are looking for, just like you were describing, Senator, and your area of the state is certainly not the only one with these concerns, these struggles, and these challenges. Housing is an ecosystem. There are so many different players that all depend upon each other and relate to each other. The chamber or the Small Business Council might be a good partner to have in that conversation. It's certainly something that we hear, and that's one of the challenges of zoning and one of the challenges of how to build a strong, sustainable community.
And infrastructure. So
And
let's say
infrastructure.
that you can't get those amenities, but they're in an adjacent community, but you're having difficulty getting to that community. Well, with more investment in infrastructure, we can make people move better, faster, smarter, so that they can have access to those amenities.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Okay, Senator Kagan, Vice Chair Kagan, you've got the final word on this briefing. And we'll let you have the last word. We're going to go to Senator Simon Eyre, and then we're going to go have the last word, the Vice Chair. Senator Simon Eyre.
All right, thank you. And I appreciate your passion. This has been an interesting discussion. But you piqued my interest at the very end of your discussion. You talked about these thousands of people that are on rental assistance. They're going to potentially be homeless and so forth. Now, I know our staff worked tirelessly trying to help people during COVID. It was very challenging. People were out of work, not of their own choice, and the state and federal government came in and helped them with the assistance, but it was always meant to be temporary. So now that COVID is waning and people are going back to work, I was just curious why you were saying you would still need that amount of funding for these families that were having housing, and then because of COVID, we helped them, but now that the jobs are coming back, why would they still stay on that assistance program in those numbers?
Yeah, so I think that is a very, very good, very, very pointed question. And so two things. First, I would recommend asking Scott Gobbert, probably pronounced that wrong again. I will get him, I'll get your contact information for him. He can really break down the data a lot more. But in layman's terms, so if you are on this type of rental assistance, there was a reason. You are already experiencing economic hardship because this doesn't happen overnight. People lost a lot of jobs during COVID. And so let's say that, you know, for you have 6 months worth of rental debt. And so you get on some of these government programs, depending on when you get on and everything else, and Scott can explain it a little bit better, that 6 months worth of rental debt might not be gone. And that debt might be parked on credit cards. That debt might be parked somewhere else. And so you see these people who are still carrying a major financial burden from COVID that hasn't gone away, even though they were getting assistance. It was just a stopgap. But the problem is still there. And so if we don't help them, the problem didn't go away. It's just going to rear its head again. But I will definitely make sure that you get in contact with the United Way of Central Maryland, who can break that down a little bit better than I could.
Okay, if you could, because, I mean, there's got to be some end point. Now, for those who can't get a job and so forth, I understand that's a different situation, but those who were forced to stop working because of COVID and they needed assistance and we provided it to them, when the jobs come back, it would seem that we would want them to get back working opposed to continuing to rely on the assistance. And that's, just want to understand that a little better. Thank you.
Senator, if I may, I think Claudia might have a good a comment here.
I just wanted to chime in because I had the same question, and our members work across the state, and talking with Scott and the other members of the Renters Coalition. So many people, particularly those at the low and extremely low end of the scale, as we've talked about, folks in minimum wage, were already in a very precarious position during COVID. And so when they got rental assistance, it did help them, and some of them are back to work. But as a couple of folks, the person in the picture that I remarked on, they may have had another crisis. So, for example, I was talking to somebody in Charles County, and they said to me, well, yes, this person got rental assistance, but now their car has broken down. And so they, you know, that now has put them in a position where, you know, they can't actually make up ground. And and in some cases, people saw rental increases of that 30%, right? And so the assistance is not, you know, it's not getting to them to where they can be whole. And so they're just, I share your concern about an upcoming eviction crisis. And I don't know, actually, from a public policy standpoint, exactly what will be the alarm. Like, how will we know how many people have to be, you know, out on the street? What will local governments, you know, I think that's a very reasonable question. But I share your question with my members and ask them, hey, you know, these are folks who already got help. Why do they continue to need help? And they talked about this is a group that was already in a very fragile place to begin with, and some of them have had challenges post-pandemic. Not quite post, but we're there.
Okay, before we go to the final question, just anybody who wants any of these PowerPoints, okay, committee counsel can provide it to you, so don't hesitate to ask if you want anything that we presented today or the presenters showed us up on the screen. And with that said, we're going to go to our final question of the day, Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this panel, and all four of you did a wonderful job, but we have advocacy, we have industry, we have counties, and we have cities, cities and towns represented. Dominic, when you talked about the burden on our counties, that's accurate, but I just think the one voice that isn't sufficiently in this room today is our nonprofit sector. And this committee and the General Assembly has enacted legislation to support our nonprofit sector, because if the rental groups and the affordable housing groups and all of those folks go out of business, then the burden on our government, our state and local governments, would be extraordinarily increased. And that goes for housing, literacy, homelessness. I mean, there's just education, battered women, you know, there's so many areas where our nonprofits are protecting and shielding our local governments. So I just want to remind us all that the importance of making sure that when we talk about what each of us does, that it's a collaboration, a partnership, and we've got to rely on our 501c3 nonprofits who are our partners in all of this. Thank you. Isn't that so?
Yeah, that didn't sound like a question, but a good way to end. Listen, I want to thank everybody. That was excellent. Tough set of questions, tough issues, and but I appreciate you taking the time today. So with that, you're released. You can go. For the committee, just very briefly, just a couple things. Last meeting, after the meeting, Lemuria did send out, if you didn't see it, a clarifying memo about the issue of sponsor panels. There was some, I think, question about if you want a sponsor panel. Here's the bottom line. You don't need to do any forms now to designate who your sponsor panel is. All you got to do is let us know. There's an email on the memo. It came out right after the hearing, the meeting we had, the organizational meeting on Thursday. So they should look in your inbox or email. But bottom line is, you send an email, here's what my sponsor panel is going to be, here are the witnesses. That's all you need to do. In the past, you had to do a specific form. On the issue of motions for reconsideration, which was another loose end we left, after consulting all the other committees in the General Assembly, as best I can tell, here's the basic rule, and I know this committee may have done it a little differently previously. It's a simple majority. We're going to keep this simple. If you want to move to reconsider, you have to be part of the prevailing party, kind of how we have to do it in the full Senate chamber, right? So you have to make that motion, you have to be on the prevailing side for the original. It's a simple majority. And all we do is ask, we don't want a month later somebody moving to reconsider. So it's got to either be contemporaneous at that voting session or at the next regularly scheduled voting session, which in most cases is going to be a week later. After that, you've had due opportunity to move to reconsider. We just don't want to have, again, 3 weeks or a month later, somebody move in to reconsider. So I think with that, I think those were the loose ends. We do, and if for those of you or your staff want a refresher on how to use our floor system, access testimony, or any of the rest, we have a demonstration here at 3:30, so your staff's welcome. It's not mandatory to attend, but they'll be here at 3:30, and so may take advantage of it, either for yourself or for your staff. That said, any other questions? We thought that we were going to have more free time between this and the OIS presentation, but it turns out we only got a half hour. But again, you don't have to be here for that, but it's available. Any other loose ends for the purpose of the next meeting? We can. Okay, well, and I have a gavel from the old office back in the. This meeting's hereby adjourned. Okay.